If my 21-year-old granddaughter hadn't leaned over during our family dinner and whispered, "Pretend you're sick. Leave now," I wouldn't be here telling you this story. 10 minutes later, police officers walked through my front door, and the son I trusted more than anyone was led away in handcuffs. What happened that night exposed a betrayal I never imagined possible. Before I continue, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I always enjoy seeing people from different places join these stories. If you're new here, please subscribe, like this video, and stay with me until the end because every moment matters. My name is Mara Sloan. I'm 60 years old, and after my husband passed away, I devoted the next 30 years to building the family manufacturing company we had dreamed of together. It wasn't easy, but I believed hard work and loyalty would secure a better future for my children and grandchildren. That evening, our annual family dinner felt like every other celebration. My oldest daughter, Nina, smiled politely across the table. My youngest son, Evan, kept mostly to himself. My oldest son, Dane, confidently entertained everyone with stories about the company's latest success. Most people admired him, and I was no different. I trusted him without question. The only person who seemed unsettled was my granddaughter, Lark. At 21, she was usually cheerful, yet she barely touched her meal and kept glancing toward the hallway as if she expected something terrible to happen. When dessert was placed on the table, she quietly leaned toward me. "Grandma, pretend you're sick and go upstairs. Right now." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the fear in her eyes stopped me cold. I didn't ask questions or hesitate. I simply stood, apologized for feeling unwell, and walked upstairs, unaware that the decision would save my life and uncover the darkest secret my family
everyone
had ever
believed
hidden.
Dane
Dane was the child every parent hoped to raise. He arrived at work before anyone else, stayed late into the evening, and always seemed ready to solve every problem that came his way. After my husband died, he stepped into a leadership role without hesitation. He handled meetings, managed company finances, and constantly assured me that I should focus on enjoying life while he took care of the difficult decisions. I saw his dedication as an act of love, and I was grateful to have someone I could depend on. Whenever questions came up about the business, I defended him immediately. I believed he had earned my trust through years of hard work. If anyone suggested he had become too powerful within the company, I dismissed the concern without giving it much thought. In my mind, he was simply doing what was necessary to keep our family business successful. My daughter, Nina, often disagreed with him. She believed important decisions were being made without enough discussion and complained that Dane insisted on controlling nearly every financial matter. Their conversations usually ended in frustration, with Dane calmly insisting he was protecting the company from unnecessary risks. I always assumed they were having the kind of disagreements that happen in every family business. My youngest son, Evan, reacted differently. Instead of arguing, he slowly stepped away from company operations. He attended fewer meetings, rarely shared his opinions, and focused on building a quieter life outside the business. I thought he had simply grown tired of competing with his older brother. Looking back now, I realize he had stopped fighting because he believed nobody would listen to him. At the time, I blamed ordinary sibling rivalry for the growing distance between my children. I convinced myself that every successful family experienced occasional conflict. It never crossed my mind that their concerns might have been genuine warnings. During her college break, my granddaughter Lark volunteered to help organize decades of company files, family records, and old financial documents stored throughout the house and office. She enjoyed history and loved learning about how her grandfather and I had built the business from almost nothing. While sorting through boxes and filing cabinets, she began noticing small details that didn't seem to fit together. Some folders appeared to be missing important paperwork. Certain financial records had been replaced with newer copies that looked different from the originals. She also overheard brief conversations that ended abruptly whenever she entered the room. At first, she assumed she was imagining things, but the strange moments continued to pile up. She didn't fully understand what any of it meant, and she wasn't trying to investigate anyone. Still, her instincts told her something was wrong. The father she had admired her entire life suddenly seemed secretive, and the confident image everyone believed in no longer matched the behavior she was quietly witnessing. Although she couldn't yet explain why, fear began replacing the trust she had always felt. Only a few hours before our family gathered for dinner, Lark came back to the house after realizing she had left her phone charger in her bedroom. She expected to be inside for only a few minutes before returning to meet a friend. The house was unusually quiet, which didn't surprise her since everyone was busy preparing for the evening. As she walked down the hallway toward the stairs, she noticed the study door was closed. Normally, Dane kept that door open whenever he worked from home. Curious, she slowed her steps after hearing unfamiliar voices inside. One belonged to her father. The other sounded like his attorney and a longtime business associate who occasionally visited the office. She had no intention of listening, but then she heard my name. The tone of the conversation immediately caught her attention. It wasn't caring or respectful. It sounded cold, calculated, and frightening. Instinctively, she reached into her pocket, opened the voice recorder on her phone, and pressed record. She remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. As the discussion continued, the truth unfolded piece by piece. They spoke openly about money that had been hidden through complicated transactions over several years. They mentioned forged signatures, unauthorized transfers between company accounts, and paperwork designed to mislead auditors. The amount involved was far greater than Lark could have imagined. Then the conversation became even more disturbing. Dane calmly explained that everything would soon be resolved because there would no longer be anyone asking difficult questions. He intended to announce later that evening that I had suffered a sudden medical emergency during our family dinner. If events unfolded as planned, investigators would focus on my unexpected death instead of examining the company's financial records. He believed the confusion and sympathy surrounding the tragedy would delay any investigation long enough for him to erase the remaining evidence. Lark stood frozen, unable to believe the words coming from her own father's mouth. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a business disagreement. She was hearing someone she loved discuss a plan that placed my life in terrible danger. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped her phone, yet she forced herself to remain silent. She knew that interrupting the meeting or confronting the men would only place her at risk before she could warn anyone. A chair suddenly scraped across the wooden floor. Someone inside said the meeting had gone on long enough. Footsteps moved toward the door. Lark quickly slipped behind a nearby hallway cabinet, pressing herself against the wall while desperately trying to silence her breathing. The study door opened only seconds later. She watched through a narrow gap as the three men walked into the hallway, continuing their conversation in lower voices before heading toward the front entrance. Only after they disappeared did she step out of hiding. She looked at the recording still running on her phone, realizing she now possessed evidence that could expose everything. At the same time, she understood one terrifying fact above all else. I had no idea my own life was in danger, and unless she acted immediately, I might never learn the truth.
What I didn't know that evening was that events had already been unfolding long before our family gathered around the dinner table. While we smiled, shared stories, and passed plates from one person to another, investigators had been quietly examining our company's financial records for months. Their work had begun after an anonymous report raised concerns about unusual transactions involving several business accounts. At first, the evidence suggested someone inside the company had been moving money through a complicated network of transfers, but proving who was responsible had been far more difficult. Every document seemed carefully prepared to hide the truth. Records matched just enough to avoid immediate suspicion, and anyone reviewing them without deeper investigation would have assumed everything was legitimate. Although investigators believed Dane was involved, they still lacked the direct proof needed to support serious criminal charges. Without clear evidence connecting him to the missing funds, the case remained incomplete. Everything changed because of Lark. After leaving the hallway with the recording safely stored on her phone, she locked herself inside her bedroom and listened to the conversation again. Each sentence confirmed what she had heard the first time. There was no misunderstanding, no innocent explanation, and no harmless business strategy. She realized waiting until after dinner could be far too dangerous. Instead of calling another family member, she searched through old emails until she found the contact information for the lead detective whose name appeared on an official request for company documents weeks earlier. Her hands trembled as she dialed the number. When the detective answered, she introduced herself, explained who she was, and said she had information that couldn't wait. At first, the detective listened cautiously. Then Lark sent the audio recording directly from her phone. Only minutes later, he called her back after reviewing enough of the conversation to understand its importance. He thanked her for contacting him and instructed her not to confront anyone in the house. He explained that officers were already preparing legal action connected to the financial investigation, but the recording had introduced an immediate threat to my safety. Their priority had suddenly changed. The detective gave Lark one simple instruction: protect your grandmother. Don't let anyone know what you've told us. We'll handle the rest. She asked how she could possibly get me away without creating suspicion. After thinking for a moment, they agreed on the safest solution. She would quietly convince me that I wasn't feeling well and encourage me to leave the table naturally. If everything went according to plan, I would remain upstairs until officers arrived. Minutes later, during dessert, she leaned close and whispered the words that still echo in my mind. "Grandma, pretend you're sick and go upstairs." I trusted the fear in her voice, even though I didn't understand it. Once inside my bedroom, I closed the door, sat near the window, and waited in confused silence. A few minutes passed before headlights appeared outside. An unmarked police van rolled slowly into the driveway, followed by several plain vehicles. Watching them arrive, I realized my granddaughter hadn't been overreacting. Something unimaginable was about to happen inside my own home. From my bedroom window, I watched several officers walk toward the front door with calm, steady movements. No flashing lights announced their arrival, and there was no shouting outside. For a brief moment, I wondered if they had simply come to ask a few questions. I still had no idea that everything Lark feared was about to unfold before my eyes. A sharp knock echoed through the house. The cheerful conversations downstairs stopped almost instantly. The silence that followed felt heavy, as though everyone sensed something was wrong. Seconds later, I heard footsteps crossing the hallway below and the sound of the front door opening. Voices replaced the silence. At first, they were controlled and professional, but the discussion quickly grew louder. Someone demanded an explanation. Another voice firmly identified law enforcement and requested full cooperation. I moved closer to the window, unable to see the front entrance clearly, but certain that something serious was happening. Then the front door opened again. Dane stepped outside, surrounded by detectives. The confidence he carried only minutes earlier had completely disappeared. His face had turned pale, and he kept looking around the property as though searching for an answer that no longer existed. His eyes briefly lifted toward the upstairs windows, and for a second I felt as if he knew I was watching. Behind him stood Nina and Evan, both frozen in disbelief. Neither of them spoke. They simply watched as investigators explained the charges. I couldn't hear every word through the closed window, but I caught enough to understand that this wasn't a misunderstanding. They mentioned financial fraud, forged company documents, conspiracy, and multiple criminal offenses connected to the business. My heart pounded so hard I had to steady myself against the wall. Nothing about the scene made sense. This was the son I had defended for years. The man I trusted to protect everything my husband and I had built was now standing beside police officers as they placed him under arrest. A quiet knock came from my bedroom door. Before I could answer, Lark stepped inside. Her face was streaked with tears, and her hands were trembling so badly she struggled to hold her phone. She closed the door behind her without saying a single word. I rushed toward her, asking what was happening and why the police had taken her father away. Instead of answering, she unlocked her phone and pressed play on an audio recording. The room filled with familiar voices. I recognized Dane immediately. At first, I hoped I was misunderstanding the conversation, but each sentence removed any doubt. I heard him discussing hidden money, false documents, and plans to avoid responsibility. Then came the words that made my knees weaken. He spoke about me as though my life were nothing more than another obstacle standing between him and his fortune. The recording ended, leaving the room painfully quiet. I looked at my granddaughter, who could barely meet my eyes. She wasn't crying because her father had been arrested. She was crying because she had been forced to reveal the truth about the person she loved. In that heartbreaking moment, the image I had carried of my oldest son for decades disappeared forever, replaced by a reality I never thought I would have to face. In the days that followed, I kept hoping the recording had captured only the worst possible moment in Dane's life. Part of me wanted to believe there was still an explanation that would somehow make everything less devastating. But every meeting with investigators brought another painful discovery, and each new piece of evidence erased a little more of the sun I thought I knew. The recording had given detectives the breakthrough they needed, but it was only the beginning. Armed with search warrants and access to additional records, forensic accountants carefully examined years of financial activity. They uncovered a pattern of deception that stretched much further back than anyone had imagined. Documents carrying my signature had been altered or completely forged. Accounts I had never approved were opened using company funds. Money disappeared through complicated transactions before resurfacing in businesses that appeared unrelated on paper but were secretly controlled by Dane through layers of ownership. Investments I believed were helping the company grow existed only to hide missing assets and disguise the movement of large sums. Every report revealed another carefully planned step designed to avoid suspicion. Investigators also found changes to inheritance paperwork that I had no memory of signing. Important legal documents had been revised without my knowledge, shifting future control of valuable company assets in ways that benefited Dane alone. Looking back, I realized he had always insisted on handling paperwork himself, often telling me I shouldn't burden myself with legal details after everything I had already endured. That trust became the greatest weapon he ever used against me. As the investigation continued, I was forced to examine years of conversations that had once seemed harmless. Whenever I wanted an outside opinion, Dane encouraged me to rely on him instead. If I suggested hiring another financial advisor, he claimed it would waste money or create unnecessary confusion. When longtime business consultants raised questions, he quietly convinced me they no longer understood the company. One by one, experienced people disappeared from my circle until his voice became the only one I regularly trusted. I hadn't noticed how isolated I had become because it happened gradually. The painful truth also changed how I viewed my other children. Nina hadn't been trying to challenge her brother out of pride. She had repeatedly questioned financial decisions because she sensed something wasn't right. I remembered every disagreement I had dismissed, every concern I had brushed aside, and every time I had defended Dane without asking for proof. Evan's distance suddenly became understandable as well. He hadn't stopped participating because he lacked interest. He had stepped away after realizing his opinions would never matter, while Dane controlled every important decision. Instead of creating conflict, he chose silence. Realizing this filled me with regret. I had unintentionally pushed away the two people who had been trying to protect both me and the company. Losing money was painful, but wealth can be rebuilt. The deeper wound came from understanding how completely my trust had been manipulated. I had spent years believing my family was divided by ordinary disagreements, when in reality those divisions had been carefully created to keep one person's actions hidden. Accepting that truth broke my heart far more than any financial loss ever could. As the investigation moved forward, the pressure on our family only grew stronger. Detectives continued collecting financial records, interviewing employees, and tracing every transaction connected to the company. News of Dane's arrest spread quickly through the business community, and people who had once admired our family began asking difficult questions. It felt as though our private pain had become a public story overnight. A few days later, Dane requested to see me. Part of me wanted to refuse, but another part needed to hear what he had to say. After everything that had happened, I still hoped he would finally tell the truth or show genuine remorse. Instead, he insisted that the investigators had misunderstood the evidence. He claimed the recording lacked context and argued that complicated business decisions had been twisted into criminal accusations. He begged me to stop cooperating and promised everything would eventually be explained. As I listened, I searched his face for the son I had loved my entire life. I couldn't find him. For years, I had defended him without hesitation. I had trusted his judgment, believed his explanations, and ignored concerns raised by others. That habit was difficult to break, but I knew I couldn't allow it to continue. When he finished speaking, I calmly told him I would not interfere with the investigation. His expression changed immediately. He reminded me that he was my son and said families should stand together no matter what happened. Hearing those words hurt because family had always meant everything to me. Yet protecting someone from the consequences of their own choices wasn't loyalty. It was enabling further harm. With more strength than I believed I possessed, I told him the truth would have to speak for itself. Leaving that meeting felt like saying goodbye to the future I had always imagined for our family. When I returned home, Lark was waiting for me. She looked exhausted from days of emotional strain and barely slept since the night she revealed the recording. She worried constantly that everyone would blame her for what had happened. Instead of celebrating that she had prevented a tragedy, she carried guilt over exposing her own father. I sat beside her and took her hands in mine. For the first time since everything began, I thanked her properly. I told her she had shown extraordinary courage when she chose to protect innocent people rather than remain silent. I reminded her that she hadn't caused this situation. Dane's own decisions had led him there. Tears filled her eyes as she admitted she still loved her father despite everything she had learned. Hearing that only made me admire her more. Love doesn't disappear overnight, even after betrayal. She wasn't choosing between loving her father and loving me. She was choosing honesty over deception. Together, we agreed that we would continue helping investigators in every way possible. We would answer every question truthfully, provide every document they requested, and never hide evidence to protect the family's public image. Our reputation could be rebuilt with time. Our integrity could only survive if we refused to abandon the truth, no matter how painful the consequences became.
The weeks after Dane's arrest were some of the hardest I had ever experienced. Every morning seemed to bring another challenge. News reports questioned the future of our company, longtime clients hesitated before renewing contracts, and several financial accounts remained frozen while investigators completed their work. Rumors spread quickly, making many employees wonder whether the business would survive at all. Some advisors suggested the simplest solution would be to sell the company before the damage became permanent. They argued that rebuilding public trust would take years and that walking away might spare us even greater losses. I listened respectfully, but deep inside I knew I couldn't abandon the business my husband and I had spent decades creating. It represented more than buildings and equipment. It carried the sacrifices, dreams, and determination that had shaped our entire lives. Instead of giving up, I reached out to Nina and Evan. I admitted mistakes I had never been willing to acknowledge before. I apologized for ignoring their concerns and for allowing one person's influence to silence everyone else. Neither of them responded with anger. Although the past still hurt, they agreed the company deserved another chance. From the beginning, we promised each other that rebuilding would happen differently. Every important financial decision would involve multiple people instead of a single voice. Independent accountants were hired to review every department, and outside auditors received complete access to company records. Nothing would remain hidden no matter how uncomfortable the truth might be. The review lasted for weeks. Investigators and auditors uncovered countless transactions that had been disguised through complicated paperwork. Funds were recovered wherever possible, unauthorized contracts were canceled, and legal teams worked to regain assets that had been transferred into businesses connected to Dane. Although the process moved slowly, each completed report represented another step toward restoring stability. Throughout this difficult period, our employees impressed me more than I could have imagined. Many had spent years believing the false image Dane carefully presented. Once they understood who had truly betrayed the company, most chose to remain. They worked extra hours, supported one another, and reminded me that loyalty built on honesty is far stronger than loyalty built on fear. Lark also made a sacrifice that touched me deeply. She postponed the start of graduate school for one semester so she could stay close to home. Every day she helped organize thousands of documents requested by attorneys, answered phone calls, sorted records, and accompanied me to meetings that often lasted for hours. She never complained, even when the emotional weight became overwhelming. Little by little, our home also began to change. Conversations replaced silence. Trust slowly returned between family members who had spent years drifting apart. Nina and Evan worked side by side without old resentments controlling every discussion. We still carried painful memories, but we no longer allowed them to divide us. Recovery didn't happen overnight. It required patience, honesty, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. Yet with every passing month, the fear that once filled our family faded a little more. In its place grew something much stronger, a commitment to protect one another through openness, accountability, and the belief that even after profound betrayal, a broken family can begin to heal together. Several months passed before the case finally reached the courtroom. By then our lives had settled into a new routine, but none of us believed the hardest part was over. We knew the trial would force us to relive every painful moment, and there was no way to avoid it. Even so, I was determined to see the process through to the end. The courtroom remained quiet as attorneys presented the evidence collected during the investigation. Day after day, financial specialists explained how company funds had been moved through a series of carefully planned transactions. They showed bank records, accounting reports, legal documents, and business agreements that revealed exactly how the money disappeared and where it eventually went. Each witness added another piece to the story until the entire picture became impossible to ignore. Investigators also described how the case had developed over many months. They explained that suspicious financial activity first caught their attention long before Dane's arrest, but proving who controlled the scheme required direct evidence. That missing link arrived when Lark came forward with the recording she had made on the afternoon of our family dinner. When the recording was played in court, the room became completely silent. The familiar voices echoed through the courtroom exactly as they had the first time I heard them. Listening to those words again was just as painful as before. This time, however, everyone heard the truth together. The recording confirmed not only the financial deception but also the urgency that led investigators to act before greater harm could occur. Lark was asked to testify about the events of that day. She answered every question honestly and remained composed despite the emotional weight of facing her own father in court. Watching her speak with such courage filled me with pride. I knew how difficult every sentence was for her, yet she never allowed fear to change the facts. As the trial continued, Dane's carefully built reputation slowly collapsed. The image of the dependable businessman who always claimed to put family first could no longer survive against overwhelming evidence. Witnesses, documents, financial records, and expert testimony all pointed to the same conclusion. When the verdict was finally announced, the courtroom remained still. The jury found Dane guilty on multiple financial fraud charges as well as conspiracy-related offenses connected to the scheme. The judge later imposed a sentence that reflected the seriousness of his actions. Along with losing his freedom, he forfeited the position, influence, and privileges he had gained through years of deception. Hearing the sentence brought no sense of celebration. No mother dreams of watching her child stand before a judge. I mourned the life Dane could have lived if he had chosen honesty instead of greed. At the same time, I understood that ignoring his actions would have betrayed every innocent person affected by his choices. As I walked out of the courthouse with Nina, Evan, and Lark beside me, I finally understood something I had struggled to accept for months. Real justice is never about revenge. It is about accepting the truth, protecting those who have been harmed, and recognizing that love does not excuse wrongdoing. Sometimes the hardest act of love is allowing accountability to take its rightful course. Today, when I look around my dinner table, there are fewer chairs filled than there once were. Even so, the warmth I feel is stronger because the people beside me are bound together by honesty instead of appearances. The business has recovered, our relationships continue to heal, and every gathering reminds me how precious trust truly is. Lark still carries guilt over the choice she made that night. Every holiday she quietly tells me she's sorry for what happened to her father. Every holiday I give her the same answer. I remind her that she didn't tear this family apart. The damage had already been done long before she discovered the truth. Her courage gave us the opportunity to stop the lies, protect innocent people, and rebuild what could still be saved. Because of her, I was given more time with the people I love. I watched Nina and Evan find their way back to each other, saw our company regain its integrity, and honored the dream my late husband and I worked so hard to build. None of that would have been possible if fear had won over honesty. Life has taught me that love isn't measured by the secrets we keep for someone. Real love sometimes requires making painful choices to protect others from harm. The truth may bring heartbreak, but it also creates the possibility of healing, accountability, and a better future. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. I'd truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you were in Lark's position, would you have exposed someone you loved to protect your family?